Darksiders 4 has finally been revealed, and for the first time ever in the same game, we'll be able to play as all Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. What does that actually mean for the combat, the story, and the core gameplay? Today we're breaking down everything officially confirmed so far, and what we can realistically and hopefully expect from the next chapter in the Darksiders saga. By the end, I'll be comparing the ideal Darksiders 4 experience for diehard fans of the series versus my own more moderate but also ideal sequel game. Darksiders 4 will be a third-person action-adventure game featuring combat, level traversal, and puzzle solving in a post-apocalyptic, story-driven adventure, which makes it similar to all the other games in the series. However, what separates it is that now players can choose their horsemen, one of the four, each with their own unique weapons and abilities. There is also an emphasis placed on the melee combat, with it being described as fast-paced and visceral. It's hinted that there will be multiple realms to explore, with players journeying to apocalyptic landscapes filled with secrets, enemies, and mythic bosses. And it'll feature mature content, such as violence and gore, which we've come to expect from the mainline series games. And finally, you'll all be happy to hear that Darksiders 4 will take place after the ending of Darksiders 1. A long time coming, since fans of the series have eagerly awaited a follow-up since 2010. Each game since then has taken place prior to or during the events of the first game, and now it's finally time to move the story forward. It's also time to talk about Darksiders 4's unique selling proposition. While this wasn't featured in the teaser trailer or even Darksiders 4's website, it's listed on Steam as having online co-op. The PlayStation Store is listed as being playable with up to 4 players. So far that's all we officially know, which gives us a decent idea of what we can expect. We're going to get a classic style Darksiders game, basically the game we've always dreamed of, the one where we get to play as all 4 horsemen. But even with that knowledge, there's still way more we don't know about Darksiders 4. For instance, what exactly will the combat system look like? Will we get to play as all 4 horsemen at the same time, or will they be separated for most of the game? Well, I hope you all are ready for some good old-fashioned speculation. Let's go ahead and dive into the unknown. Obviously, Darksiders 4 won't be a solo Strife game, which is a bit of a bummer because Strife is an entertaining horseman with an interesting perspective. He has unique gameplay potential and quite frankly deserves his own game since each of his siblings got one. Darksiders Genesis gave us a strong glimpse into his ranged, almost bullet hell-esque playstyle, but many people didn't play that one because it wasn't a mainline entry. If you haven't already played it, I highly suggest it. If not for the isometric perspective and with a few graphical upgrades, it could have been a mainline entry for the series. The gameplay is crisp and it feels like a true Darksiders game while adding new and interesting gameplay systems to the series formula. Best of all, it gives us a glimpse into how multiplayer may function in Darksiders 4. Strife shared the game with his brother War in Darksiders Genesis, and will share it with him once more in Darksiders 4, along with his sister Fury and his older brother Death. There's a long list of games that I hope Darksiders 4 borrows from to accomplish his multiple character and multiplayer ideas. The main one is X-Men Legends and its sequel, X-Men Legends 2. X-Men Legends is a 4-player action RPG with crunchy combat, comic accurate powers, tons of collectibles and loot, and fun traversal options based on each mutant's power set. There are 15 playable characters, each with their own unique skill trees, including passive buffs, offensive powers, active buffs, debuffs, and power attacks. Like Darksiders 2, there is an experience gauge that levels the player up, which is tied to progress gained from missions and combat. Leveling up gives the player a separate pool of points to put into base stats and skills, which are called mutant powers. What I like about X-Men Legends and its follow-up games, including Marvel Ultimate Alliance, is just how easy it is to go from solo play to multiplayer. And I like how characters can team up for unique power combos, which grant additional EXP bonus. I tend to prefer how stat-heavy and RPG-coded the X-Men Legends games are compared to Ultimate Alliance, and I think the template could work well for Darksiders 4. However, I don't like the idea of always having all 4 horsemen on screen at once, because it would feel a little cheesy and low rent unless the story gave us a good reason to chain them all together. The Horsemen are famously known to prefer their independence and solitude, so it would be strange having them team up together throughout the whole game. Which brings us to Justice League Heroes, which is similar to X-Men Legends in many respects, but allows only 2 players at a time. At the time, I thought it was a tremendous downgrade compared to Legends, but it actually allowed for more focused storytelling between the teams paired together for each level. If co-op was pushed throughout the entire adventure of Darksiders 4, I prefer it to be limited to 2 horsemen at a time for most of the adventure. But for certain sections and boss fights, it should open up to all 4 horsemen. Kinda like how RE6 did when certain character campaigns merged together. Think about it. War and Death team up to take out a powerful demon underboss, while Fury and Strife take out a weapons forge somewhere nearby. This could culminate in a massive 4-player boss fight with the Demon Lord who is in charge of it all. Beyond that, other possible influences could include Hunter the Reckoning, another favorite of mine, Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, and of course, Darksiders Genesis. Considering these as possible influences, the main thing that wouldn't work for Darksiders 4 is giving it an isometric or top-down perspective that these games are known for. Darksiders 4 needs to be a full-on third-person game like the other mainline entries in the series. That's where games like Marvel's Avengers from Crystal Dynamics and Gotham Knights come into the picture. They aren't the most popular games for various messed up reasons, but they still give us a good look at how a multiplayer action-adventure game like Darksiders 4 could play. As a caveat, Avengers doesn't let players team up throughout the entire campaign, and it mostly settles for post-game mission-based content for co-op players. Even so, it juggles a base cast of 6, all with unique powers, combat styles, and traversal mechanics, similar to the isometric beat-em-ups, but with an over-the-shoulder perspective. It didn't quite live up to its potential thanks to a ton of early missteps by Crystal Dynamics, including some repetitive gameplay sections. Despite that, it still may be the closest thing we have to what Darksiders 4 is trying to be, as it also features a progression system, in addition to skill trees for melee combat and abilities, multiple characters to switch between, and even a gear system such as what was featured in Darksiders 2. Additionally, it also has story sections that separate the characters into unique pairings or even solo play based on what's happening. What we hope Darksiders 4 improves is, for one, not having a disappointing microtransaction / live service model baked into its overall design. This was probably the biggest failure of Crystal Dynamics Avengers at the time of release. I hope Gunfire just makes a great game that's good for maybe 2 playthroughs and possibly more DLC adventures if necessary. Gunfire has been really solid with this. Just look at the DLCs for each of the Darksiders games, as well as Remnant 1 and Remnant 2. I've never had buyer's remorse about purchasing DLC for these games and have for the most part really enjoyed them. And whenever I go back to Darksiders War Master, I always wish for some additional DLC once the game ends, especially with those grind-heavy horse riding trophies. And so I hope Darksiders 4 continues this good streak of DLC. In addition to that, Darksiders 4 will have to have a lengthy campaign for it to truly feel like a Darksiders game. Avengers based campaign was less than 10 hours, but the shortest campaign in Darksiders may be the first game, which clocks in at roughly 20 hours. And of course Darksiders needs to have platforming and puzzle challenges instead of running from combat room to combat room. It's a good pace breaker, but also nice to use your brain every once in a while instead of your blades. Let's consider this. While we know the game will feature online co-op, it's still possible that it will primarily be a single player adventure, possibly featuring segments where each of the horsemen briefly team up. That's where games like Legacy of Kain Defiance and Devil May Cry 5 come in. In these games, you play as multiple characters, each with their own sections of the story. You switch between the characters whenever a new chapter begins. These characters may cross paths, team up, and even fight one another as their quests advance. But in the end, it's their actions that will push the story forward. I like these games because they tell a continuous story and allow you to see things from different perspectives. The best aspect is when the actions each character takes in their chapters affects events in the other characters' chapters. I think the ultimate version of this can be found in a little game called Sonic Adventure, where a cast of 6 characters with varying goals each tell their small parts in a grander narrative that culminates in a final campaign which unites all the characters. If you're wanting a single player Darksiders experience with the hint of co-op instead of the other way around, this will be what you're looking for. Even after mentioning all those other games I love, all you really have to do is play through Strife's spin-off game to see what we can likely expect from Darksiders 4. I always thought Genesis felt like a tech demo for what a game featuring all Four Horsemen would be like, only on a smaller scale. Starting with Strife, I believe his gameplay from Genesis will mostly stay intact for Darksiders 4, including his use of traps, twin daggers, and elemental loads for his magnums. Both War and Strife are playable, and from the start both can summon and ride their respective horses, Ruin and Mayhem. And in the teaser of Darksiders 4, we get the image of all Four Horsemen riding their horses. When playing solo, players can freely switch between War and Strife, even mid-combo. If Darksiders 4 features co-op throughout the entire adventure, then it may also have this feature for solo players. What I love about Genesis is that it still feels like a core Darksiders game, with a balance of platforming, puzzle solving, collectibles, upgrades, and combat. Even if Darksiders 4 changes things, it'll still need to fit in the series mold, just like Darksiders Genesis. And like Darksiders 1 and 2, Genesis features a boss fight that takes place entirely on horseback. Darksiders 4 definitely needs to have strong horseback gameplay and some unique horseback bosses. Let's talk about what's likely versus what we fantasize about, and perhaps come to a compromise. Let's start with the ideal. And before I begin, go ahead, pause the video, and write down your ideal version of Darksiders 4, and we'll compare our notes in the comments below. This is a channel that welcomes all fans of the Darksiders and Legacy of Kain series. Just keep it civil in the comments. The ideal Darksiders 4, with the details we've been given so far, have each of the horsemen fully playable, each with the skills, abilities, and character growth they've gained from previous adventures. It would be basically like playing each of those previous games all over again in a brand new world. Death would play like he did in Darksiders 2, plus some brand new tricks. War and Fury likewise, but similar to their own respective games. And then we have Strife, who would need a bit of an upgrade to put him in a full third-person game, but would retain the bulk of his skills from Genesis. Each rider would also gain access to new weapons, skills, abilities unique to this game, each based on the bosses they defeat, though tied to each horseman's unique playstyle, which includes Death's necromancy, Fury's havoc forms, War's possibly chaos magic, and Strife's traps, shadow clones, weapons, and elemental loads. In solo play, we'd be able to swap to each horseman freely and customize their skills, having AI play the ones we aren't using during the team-up sections. We want the combat system to be more like Darksiders 1 and 2, plus even more Devil May Cry-esque stylish combat, with more weapons, more magic, and execution animations for each horseman. For in-game graphics, we want the stylish but realistic art style presented in the Darksiders 1 and Darksiders Genesis opening cutscenes, instead of the more comic book aesthetic of the previous games. And of course, the brutality and gore should be cranked up to 11. We want the world to be larger than that of Darksiders 2 to accommodate the 4 riders, and have drop-in drop-out co-op. Most importantly, all 4 riders will have access to their horses right from the start, with open world areas large enough to fit them, along with a variety of both solo and co-op dungeons. But the overworld would always have 4 horsemen roaming around, whether co-op or computer controlled. There'd be enemies, collectibles, and areas to traverse on the overworld, and the horsemen will be able to traverse all the realms present in the previous games, such as Heaven, Hell, Earth, the Void, Shadow's Edge, the Forge Lands, Kingdom of the Dead, Eden, Lost Light, the Abyss, and the realm of the Charred Council. And of course, the horsemen will have powerful combination attacks using a mix of wrath magic and their weapons. And finally, there will be a PvP fight arena that lets players challenge one another with not just the horsemen, but additionally feature previous bosses in the series, such as Samael, Abaddon, Lust, Pride, Uriel, Uthane, Absalom, and Belial. Along with that, we get a Crucible Coliseum with tons of unique rewards, we get new costumes and gear, we'd also get maybe a Strife shooter version like a Strife Gears of War minigame, and we get seasons upon seasons of DLC, low priced or free. That's ideal. That's just a quick and dirty summary of what people will like, so we won't go into too much detail, we could be here all day. But for what's likely out, actually just skip to the fantasy booking, as I think my ideas won't be too far from what the team goes with. Again, this section here is the vision of Darksiders 4 that I personally want to see. This isn't what's actually in the game. As of this recording, that information isn't yet available. So here it is, my dream Darksiders game within the realm of existing reason. The first 2 games in the series were considered AAA releases for their time, while the follow-up games were firmly considered AA. With the success of Gunfire Games' Remnant series, I think they will once more be given the budget necessary to fulfill their Darksiders ambitions. I'm not expecting GTA 6 or even Last of Us 2 budgets, but the developers will have what they need to make Darksiders 4 a hit. With that said, that gives us free reign to make the best possible Darksiders game, but we also have to consider time constraints. Darksiders 4 has likely had a normal development process, as it's been stated to have been in development since 2021. That puts some constraints on what the devs can reasonably provide us in terms of scale, especially since Gunfire Games is a mid-sized studio. I fully expect Darksiders 4 to have a scale a fair bit larger than Darksiders 2 on initial release, as Darksiders 2 was around the same size as Remnant 2's base game. Both games have around 5 worlds each, with some open world zones and a scattering of dungeons in each world. Even saying that, a couple worlds in Darksiders 2, such as Shadow's Edge, are much smaller than the earlier areas and don't feature side dungeons at all. Again, that said, Darksiders 2 will be our template. If this were strictly a single player game, I'd go with Darksiders 1 gameplay style. But I find that Darksiders 2's bigger worlds, loot system, and mixture of main and side dungeons makes for a more compelling multiplayer game. And of course we'll combine that with Darksiders Genesis since it introduced a strong multiplayer skeleton into the series. So after following up the events of Darksiders 1 with War victorious over the Destroyer, the Horsemen are somehow sent to another realm and scattered to separate regions. Now alone, the Horseman we're controlling is forced to escape a tutorial dungeon. The game will either let us choose our Horseman from the start or default us to War or Strife. I suppose I would prefer to choose my own Horseman, if for each of them to have their own unique tutorial dungeons to escape from. They may possibly be depowered in the story, but regardless, we start the game with a fresh Horseman. No weapons or abilities from the previous games, except for their main weapon and possibly 1 or 2 Wrath abilities from before. This way, we give the developers carte blanche to make this adventure unique and to pace it masterfully. As cool as having everything at the start of the game is, it can create a massive pace killer for the devs, or even put a strain on them to not only create obstacles for the Horsemen's previous equipment, but also create new tools more interesting than those from before. Let's face it, as gamers, we like getting drip-fed new powers, abilities, weapons, and tools, especially traversal tools. So I'm good with having only the base toolkit for each Horseman. All we're needs at the start of Darksiders 4 is Chaos Bringer, Blade Geyser, and maybe Harpoon Tackle. If they're generous, maybe they'll give them the Tremor Gauntlet too. I wouldn't mind that. Everything else, just like Metal Gear, procure on site. Let's see what new tools the devs have in store for us. So eventually the Horsemen we play would escape from the tutorial dungeon. And finally, once we escape, we would be able to call our horse and ride into the open world area of the first realm. From here, we meet up with the other Horsemen, likely with one of them initially, the one trapped in the nearest tutorial dungeon, before linking up with the entire group. From this point on, players will be able to switch freely between the Horsemen, and they each have unique powers and platforming abilities. Fury has the double jump via the Flame Hollow, and gets her other Hollow abilities later, or maybe even something new instead. Death has Wall Run and later Death Grip. War can move large objects with his own strength, and even larger objects with gauntlet upgrades. And Strife can lockpick arcane locks and wall jump. On the world map, the Horsemen that are not being controlled by the player each ride around attacking enemies and assisting the player when nearby. There will be a call function to call them to fight alongside the player or solve co-op puzzles, but the game will mostly be a solo adventure similar to Darksiders 2. This just means that you will mostly be alone unless you call or form a party with your Nephilim siblings. I will likely either have a party function to keep allies linked on the overworld, or I want certain areas to automatically limit how many Horsemen players can ally with. I'm thinking a mix would be good. That way you can easily select the Horseman sibling you prefer assisting you. Certain chapters of the story may separate the Horsemen into different pairings, and each world will likely have 3 main dungeons, fairly large in size and scope, along with a smattering of smaller, possibly procedurally generated dungeons with loot and enemies that reset after some time. Each of the Horsemen will gain new weapons and abilities unique to this game. Enemies defeated will have a chance to drop soul cores that could be used to craft unique weapons. This will be a merger of the possessed weapon system from Darksiders 2 and the enemy creature cores collected in Darksiders Genesis. Boss cores, for instance, will be used to upgrade possessed weapons into unique named weapons. The Darksiders 4 game I'm envisioning would also feature a skill tree and level up system. Levels would be obtained by defeating enemies in combat, talking to various NPCs, and advancing missions and side missions. Leveling up by default would increase each horseman's HP, wrath pool, and chaos gauge. But alongside that would be enhancements, such as those present in Darksiders 1 and Darksiders 3. Those of course could modify Fury and War's attack potency, passive abilities, as well as base stats and elemental damage. Enhancements will be limited to each horseman's main weapon and will be the most powerful modifiers in the entire game, such as they were in Darksiders 3. Basically, builds will revolve around several powerful enhancements along with other gear pieces such as talismans and armor to further augment a player's build. Think more of a merger of Darksiders 2 and Darksiders 3. The skill tree system will yet again change, this time incorporating both battle moves and wrath abilities. Skill points would also be used to learn new wrath attacks or weapon skills, and I have the horseman's main weapon level up based on use like it did in Darksiders 1. Each level grants more damage and access to powerful new techniques. After every 3 to 5 weapon levels, each character's main weapon will gain a new slot for enhancements, which will maybe max out at 4 in total. So I see each weapon maybe maxing out at weapon level 20. The dungeons for the main quest will be a mixture of co-op and solo. Most will be solo and 2-player, while some unique ones will require all 4 horsemen. I think these will be semi-rare and the most fun in the game. The overall power of bosses should be adjusted for solo versus co-op play. This includes hit points, damage, certain attacks being added or removed, and additional henchmen enemies added for co-op play. In solo play, the AI allies will be toned down, doing far less damage overall. There will be a few bosses made for horseback gameplay on large maps, with players now able to aim weapons and magic from horseback. I wouldn't change much about the series bosses. Just make some of their attacks bigger and maybe have them be more aggressive to account for multiple players. They wouldn't be traditional Zelda style bosses, such as they were in Darksiders 1, but instead more like the bosses in Darksiders 2, 3, and Genesis. I want co-op bosses to feel kinda like raid bosses where parties can strategize around team roles, including support and attacking. Darksiders 2 style bosses will be perfect for this, since some of them you would even fight on the overworld. But I also want to shout out the bosses in Remnant 2. Most of them are really well made and unique. So kudos to Gunfire Games. I'm super glad that they're going to bring that energy back into the Darksiders franchise. So overall, I want the combat to function largely like it did in the previous games, though I want to add more wrath abilities and items that encourage differing party playstyles. Each horseman will have their own unique defensive action. War blocks and counters, Death evades, Fury has her whip dodge / arcane counter, and Strife would teleport away with a shadow clone. I'd add new wrath abilities, some of which could buff the party, some of which would offer healing, and others would offer other types of protections. But I would also have potions which can do the same thing, though perhaps a little less effectively, so as to still encourage the use of those wrath skills. Executions will remain as epic as ever, with each character having unique ones with all the enemies. There would even be an incentive for players to land the final blow on bosses, because executions would grant individual players more experience points, and each horseman will have a different cinematic execution on the bosses, just like they do in their solo games. For the purposes of story consistency, the game should have certain parts where all the horsemen aren't always available and playable. It would be fine if this wasn't the case, but I think it would add some tension to the gameplay if they went this route. Also, storyline wise, it would make things more interesting to split the horsemen up from time to time. Makes the parts when they're all together even more special. And when it comes to the art style of the game, as much as I want that stylized yet realistic art style that we saw in the opening cutscenes of Darksiders 1 and Darksiders Genesis, I think something close to that, but still within the bounds of what we've already seen in the series, would be a good compromise. Just give it more budget than Darksiders 3. Honestly, I think that would make it close to what we've already seen in Remnant 2, which also has a very fantastical yet grounded art style that shifts a little depending on which world we're exploring. As for the campaign length, anything between Darksiders 1 and 2 will be fine with me. Darksiders 1 was 20 hours, and 2 was technically about 60 if New Game Plus was included, which was a necessary playthrough to 100% the game, but the initial road to the credits was roughly 30 hours. I suppose Darksiders 3's length was a nice sweet spot at about 26 to 27 hours, but for me, this one has to be a little longer, so I say aim for Darksiders 2's 30 plus hours. That would include whatever grinding is needed to 100% the game. As for the campaign length, anything between Darksiders 1 and 2 would be fine with me. Darksiders 1 was 20 hours, and 2 was technically about 60 if the New Game Plus was included, which was necessary as a playthrough to 100% the game. But the initial road to the credits was roughly 30 hours. I suppose Darksiders 3's length was a nice sweet spot at about 26 or 27 hours. But for me, this one has to be a little longer. So I say aim for Darksiders 2's 30 hours plus. That would include whatever grinding is needed to 100% the game. Post-game would include the Crucible, and a DLC route through a new world. Something that expands the story, but is somewhat self-contained, like what we saw in Darksiders 2. I didn't talk much about the story, because for me personally, I'm just here for the ride. I never really critiqued the story of Darksiders, as it's entertained me just fine since the beginning, with solid characters and epic moments. I just hope to see familiar faces such as Vulgrim, Samael, Lilith, Dees, Ulthane, and Azrael. And of course, I like to see Lucifer finally show up and get his comeuppance, along with the Charred Council. But the highlight for me will be the interactions between the Horsemen. I'm looking forward to those the most. I'd be so surprised and disappointed if there wasn't some good banter between them, especially with Death and Strife. You just know they're going to be roasting everybody. Honestly, I'm just excited to be in this world again with these characters. So I'm down for whatever adventure we get, whether it's the final game or continues into the next. The world of Darksiders is so vast, we could potentially get stories in this verse for a long time, and I'd be down for that. But I also hope that they're able to get the voice actors back from the previous game. They absolutely have to get War and Death's actors back. Both actors added unique dimensions to those characters, from War's stoic honor and seething rage, to Death's subtle gentleness and snark. At the end of the day, Darksiders 4 is shaping up to be the most ambitious entry yet. Whether it leans towards single player or full co-op, the chance to finally play Four Horsemen is something fans have dreamed of for over a decade. I just want to ride Ruin again and smash demons with War's Chaos Eater, and see the riders banter and clash as they take on heaven, hell, and everything in between. But what about you? What's your dream Darksiders 4? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to compare notes. If you all like this and want to see more Darksiders and Legacy Kain videos, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to see more. I also have a Patreon down below as well. Join there to support more content like this. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.